Dean and I have exchanged a few book recommendations over time, and you had recommended a book called The Good Life. And I think it's the longest longitudinal study, so like a study over time of people trying to figure out what makes for a good life. And I guess, the spoiler alert, it's the quality of relationships. Many of the relationships they cite are, personal and familial, but many are also professional. Relationships are really important, and I think that is something that, maybe as a bookish person, maybe you can forget and maybe undervalue. And so I guess, the reading things like that can be really helpful in reinforcing lessons. And I don't know how broadly applicable that is, but I think there are lessons kind of in everything that you read.
Welcome back to another episode of How I Got My Job. We are so excited to have our esteemed guest, another heavy hitter in the industry, Jeff McDonnell. But before we jump into who he is, what he does, we have some housekeeping as usual. Dean, can you let everyone know what we've been up to at Coffee Connectors?
Yeah, so we're really excited. We've rolled out the website, so you can now find us at coffeeconnectors.com. Again, coffeeconnectors.com, or you can find us off the Northbridge website. But for those of you that are listening for the first time, the goal of Coffee Connectors and this website is to get first gens and folks that are not born with a network, to give them access into commercial real estate. It's a really difficult industry to break into. We've been doing research. We're finding that 90% of folks that are able to get jobs, period, but in the real estate, I think it's even higher than that, get it through networking. And so our goal here is to give access and insight for folks that weren't born with that access and insight. And so the website is open to all. The podcast is on there. And then we are setting up individual coffees for folks that get certified. So if you'd like to meet Jeff, you'd like to meet other executives, please log into the website, sign up, and we will go through the certification process and get you in touch with other real estate executives. So I will bump it back to you, B, to introduce our guest.
Well, the great thing about people in commercial real estate is that they do want to help. They just don't know how to get to you guys. And so we are that connector to make it happen. And jumping right in, Jeff McDonnell, he joined Partners Capital in 2015 in the London office before relocating to the US in 2020. His title at Partners Capital is Senior Principal, and we will talk all about what that means. He is also a member of the Private Markets Investment Research Team, focusing on real estate and private equity. Prior to joining Partners Capital, Jeff was a portfolio construction analyst. Jeff holds a BS with class honors with the U because he's not from here, right? In economics and finance from University College Dublin, and then went on to complete his CFA. Jeff, we are so happy to have you here today.
Great. No, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Of course. Jeff, are you ready to dig in? Because Dean's coming at you with some questions.
I'm ready to go.
All right. Go ahead, Dean. You're up.
All right, Jeff. First question. And for everyone listening, it's always helpful to give some context and think about it from the lens of somebody that has not been in the business world. What is Partners Capital? And then would love to hear sort of what your day-to-day job looks like at Partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So Partners Capital is what we call an outsourced investment office. And what we do is work with a range of family offices and institutions, most often endowments and foundations. And the very largest of those groups, say those endowments or foundations that have maybe $10 billion or more of assets, so the sort of Harvards and Yales of the world, they'll often have their own internal investment team. But for smaller groups, and small being a relative term here, so those between, maybe $100 million and $1 to $2 billion, they may want to pursue the same investment approach as those larger groups, but maybe don't have the same internal resources that they need to do that. So we work with those groups to manage their investment portfolios. In terms of what my day-to-day looks like, I guess it's mainly trying to find interesting real estate opportunities for our clients to invest in. So we're meeting with groups like Northbridge, where B and Dean work, trying to find the right partners to access what we believe to be interesting real estate opportunities. And so that means meeting with lots of different groups, performing due diligence on their firm and their investment approach, and seeing if it aligns with our own investment philosophy. And yeah, that's kind of the very high level.
Great. And Jeff, when you were in college and thinking about your careers, did you know that these kinds of jobs existed, or did you kind of learn that over the years working?
No, I definitely didn't. I was always amazed by some of my classmates in college who knew that they wanted to work on the fixed income structuring desk at JP Morgan, when none of those words meant kind of anything to me. And I think it was I always found it kind of daunting trying to figure out what the different elements of the finance world involved. And I think, like B mentioned, my major at university was economics and finance was very much my area of interest, and trying to understand the different the different categories within finance was something I found difficult without really having. I didn't have family members or kind of close friends or things like that who worked in the industry. I guess how I arrived at where I am today was really, I thought, a lot of what I enjoyed reading about was sort of more long-term investing rather than, say, short-term trading. Using that as kind of one way to differentiate between different roles, I kind of figured something in the asset management industry, or at least reading through various brochures and kind of analyst programs, something in the asset management industry might appeal. And I was fortunate to get a role on the graduate analyst program at a firm in Dublin called the Davy Group. And there I worked within the private wealth and asset management department, in fund selection, and spent 18 months there. Had been in touch with a couple of recruiters about trying to get over to London, and it was through a recruiter that I was introduced to Partners Capital, and really through the interview process that I kind of came to learn about the industry that I'm in now.
So you said a lot, which I appreciate, because people who are listening to this podcast today, they do not have people who they can reach out to. And it sounds like you're in that same situation, right? So what, based on your experience and what you've learned throughout this process, right, getting to where you are today, what advice would you give them for someone who is really looking to get into commercial real estate? They can't figure it out. It sounds like you did a lot of reading to figure out just the beginning steps. Talk to us about that process a little bit, and how you can help a first-gen students get into the field, or even figure out what they want to do within the field.
I did, even though I didn't have any kind of direct connections, at various points, friends and family and other people, knew that this was an area that I was interested in, and, offered to introduce me to people. And I think, I probably took up some people on those offers. And when I did, I thought this was a huge burden that I was imposing on the person that I might be reaching out to. My experience since I myself started working is that when I do get those emails, which is not, that frequent, I'm really happy to be able to help. Maybe there's still that difficult bit of finding, a connection or someone to reach out to, but I think at least knowing that those people are probably, receiving those emails more warmly maybe than I thought they would, is something that maybe makes it a little bit easier. And I guess, something like Coffee Connectors is really great for that, because I guess it gives you potentially someone to reach out to.
A lot of folks don't realize that people are willing to help, and
Yeah.
it's making that connection. But Jeff would even just like to rewind the clock, because we'd love just to tell people stories kind of from the beginning, where they grew up, and then
Sure.
and where you went to high school, and then how you got to college. Would be great to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Ireland, in a town called Dundalk, which I think is still something like the fifth or sixth largest town in Ireland. So, reasonably big town by the sea. And it was really in high school that I became interested in economics and finance. We actually have this year in Ireland, which is like a really cool thing, I think, where you have this kind of like try everything year before picking what subjects you want to study age 17 and 18. You have three electives. I went into the year thinking that all three of my electives would be physics, chemistry, and biology. And by the time I finished that year, I wasn't doing any of those subjects, and I was doing all sort of economics, business and accounting, which was a pretty dramatic shift, I suppose, and meant that I was probably, going from studying something more science related at university. At that time, I thought I might want to study medicine. Maybe I had an economics teacher who I really liked, and really engaged me in the subject. And he did things like take us to, I guess, economics as, there's a big overlap with politics, and he would take a small bus of us up to Dublin, where we would go and sit in the audience for different sort of political panel shows, which are not as lively in Ireland as they are in the US, but they're still pretty interesting, and really interesting to go and watch, politicians debate policies and things like that. And it was also at this time, sort of 2007, 2008, so we were having the global financial crisis, and the impact of economics and the economy was really clear to see, Ireland in particular. And from and that was really when I decided to that economics and finance was something that I wanted, and more economics at that point, was something that I wanted to pursue at university, and potentially as a career.
So then you're in university. How do you make the transition into the first job? And I know that you had a really nice internship. That's what we're promoting, is that's a big piece. So we'd love to hear that. I think that's we're at that tension point right now with a lot of folks that are on the podcast. They're in school and they're trying to figure out the first foot in the door.
Yeah, sure. And in my penultimate year at university, that was when a lot of my classmates were applying for analyst programs, which again, if I hadn't had those classmates, it wouldn't have occurred to me to do the same. Probably sent out, I don't know, 25 or more applications. I think I had maybe one or two interviews. Unfortunately, wasn't successful there, but I was, again, very fortunate to have a connection to someone who worked at Allianz, Global Investors, and they were able to. They're based in Germany, and they were actually able to set me up with with an interview with a team at PIMCO, which is a global bond. Well, they were a global bond investor and most famous for investing in bonds, but now they have a much broader focus than that. Thankfully, those interviews went well, and I managed to spend the summer in Munich, which was really nice for a couple of reasons. It was a really interesting role. It was actually on the asset-backed securities desk. I guess maybe that will be one for the show notes afterwards. But having had that internship was obviously really helpful in applying for graduate roles. A year later, certainly gave kind of an obvious question for an interviewer to ask about, and it was something then that you could speak. Something you could prepare to speak about, which is always really helpful.
Your connection in getting that internship wasn't someone who was like in a principal role, right?
Hmm.
They were an executive assistant and they were the ones that brought you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was, certainly not a connection that I would have thought of at the time. I think it was something, it was my dad's sister who had this role as an EA, and I think it was my dad, or maybe at, I don't know, a Christmas dinner or something like that, that it was suggested that she might be able to put me in touch with someone there. And I think um, Dean and B will know, if you have a colleague, no matter what team they're on, and they, have someone that they're hoping to, put forward for an internship role, that's definitely something that you don't consider what role it is they have on the team. It's just someone that and would like to do a favor for.
So, Jeff, I think the most interesting part of your story, although a lot of it is interesting, is the fact that you moved into real estate later on in the game, right? And
Yeah,
I think that transition is not easy. You've done
yeah.
something for 3 to 5 years. You feel like you're, a specialist in this program. Then you're moving on to something brand new that you think you might enjoy, but you're starting from scratch.
Can be a difficult pivot to make, and I think there's sort of two elements to it. One is you're working, still in a job, probably early in your career, pretty hard. It's hard to find the time to sit down and figure out what it is that you might want to do. When I joined Partners Capital, I began as a generalist and helping to, as an associate, you kind of do a little bit of everything. I helped to manage some client portfolios, and I helped them on the research side across a couple of different asset classes. The research side was always something that I found to be really interesting. I worked on a couple of real estate projects. It's maybe one out of every 5 or 6 projects I worked on was a real estate one. I had that sort of small bit of real estate experience in my internship. Um, but really what I liked most about real estate was I found it to be, frankly, an asset class I could understand a little bit. Going back to the sort of economics thing, so much of real estate is supply and demand. I felt like there was an element of real estate that was tied to the big picture macroeconomic questions that I enjoyed reading about. And that was, partly what I guess attracted my interest. And and effectively over time, I was able to, at least the way it kind of worked here was, you know, uh, there would be a project coming up. It would be a real estate one, and someone would send out a note saying, "Does anyone have capacity to work on a real estate, this particular project?" And and I guess I was kind of always trying to put my hand up for the real estate ones, such that over time, I guess I had done more and more real estate, and it kind of became a small minor specialism, I guess, at least as a junior person on the team. And over time, I was able to sort of uh, to transition my role effectively to be full time focused on real estate. So that was I guess I was fortunate in that respect to have a company and a mentorship program that kind of allowed you to move in that direction.
So I just want to jump in, Jeff. You are
Sure.
well read, and that's why you feel really good and confident in what you do, right? So, what I would like to ask on behalf of the folks who are listening is maybe you can give us a bunch of sources that you do read and things that you're interested in so we can share with the team. Because maybe some folks are like, yes, Jeff, you read. What are you reading? Right? So they can jump in. So, we'll make sure to get that from Jeff and add it to the show notes for you guys because I think it's important for you guys to start reading and figuring things out while you're in college. I think it's helpful. It helps Jeff. It has helped Jeff, and I think it'll help you.
I've always been interested because you read very broadly. You're not just reading about real estate, and would be interested. I know you just mentioned last week that you had finished War and Peace, which is not an easy book to tackle, and I don't for anybody in college that doesn't have free time on their hands. But you're also reading about transcendentalists and history. Do you find that reading outside of real estate is helpful in your job as an investor? It seems like that there are things that you draw from those materials, but would be interested in your point of view.
Maybe the truest answer is that I want to believe it's true. I love to read, and so I hope it's true. And I think I think that it probably is. Reading widely is really helpful, and actually Dean and I have exchanged a few book recommendations over time, and you had recommended a book called The Good Life. And I think it's the longest longitudinal study, so like a study over time of people trying to figure out what makes for a good life. And I guess the spoiler alert, it's not too much of a spoiler, I think it's probably on the back cover, is that it's the quality of relationships. And that's something obviously that is something that's really interesting to read about, and read about how they come to those conclusions, and read about the different people in the study, and how important relationships are. And in the role that I work in, and I think in the real estate industry more generally, relationships are really important. And I think that is something that maybe as a bookish person, maybe you can forget and maybe undervalue. I do remember thinking, I don't know if you've read Don Quixote, but there's or one of the kind of bits in that book is that whatever happens, he's constantly able to reference. He predicts something is going to happen because he's seen this situation before in a book, and then something completely different happens, and then he sort of back solves and says, oh well, actually of course that was going to happen, I was referencing the wrong book, I should have been referencing this book instead. And if you watch CNBC for 10 minutes, that's basically the entire finance industry is say, oh well, interest rates dropped, so we think this will happen, and then the opposite thing happens, and so they say, oh well, actually we were looking at the wrong example or whatever. I don't know how broadly applicable that is, but I think there are lessons kind of in everything that you read.
As we're coming up on the last minutes here, I think, Jeff, 3 questions we'll leave with. What's a hobby you're pursuing these days? What's the last movie you saw? And if you could go to one concert, who would it be, living or dead?
Oh, okay, good questions. So hobby, I've been doing a lot of cycling recently. I watched I think it's called Unchained or something like that on Netflix. It's their where they follow different riders in the Tour de France. So I've been donning my shorts and t-shirt and getting out on, doing my best to imitate those guys around Central Park at the weekends. So that's one thing. And the most recent movie I saw, maybe embarrassingly, was Barbie. I saw Oppenheimer right before, but
You're like, I have to throw in the Oppenheimer. It wasn't just Barbie.
Barbenheimer, isn't that what they're calling it?
It is. And actually, I did enjoy the Barbie movie. It was very good.
I love that for you, Jeff. I love that for you. Well, Jeff, we just want to really, really thank you for coming on. Guys, we got you another heavy hitter. You learned a lot from Jeff, and he is someone that you are able to reach out and say you want to connect with him. Jeff has graciously said, yes, I will become a connector, and he wants to talk to you. And if there are some questions that we didn't hit, reach out to us and we'll get you in touch with Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. We're super grateful for your time, and I'm sure the students are as well.
Oh yeah, thank you both very much. Thank you for having me on. It was great to speak.